we've talked about, someday retiring, and I've said to people, it would be really easy to just coast from here to there. We have a very healthy church family. God is doing amazing things in relationships and on mission. But the last thing I want to do is coast. I was challenged at conference this last week from a pastor who said he has taken on as one of his concepts, always do the hard thing. I didn't like that. But I'll be honest, there are aspects to all of this that are hard. There are aspects that are scary. There are aspects of we've never done it this way before, and all of that plays into it. And I have said in my spirit, God, why wouldn't I want what it seems that you're doing so that we can use our strengths, protect each other in our weaknesses, and be better together? And I am all in. It's harder. It's going to take real work, and I'm making a commitment to lead for my part into that. And I have to just say, I have totally embraced my brothers and have enjoyed loving to get to know them and locking arms in ministry together, and look forward to what God has ahead.
Yeah. Well, it is my privilege and responsibility to work through some content here, but before we do, I will refer to this document that you have in front of you, most of you hopefully by now, but very thankful to be in a place like today. There's so many, yes, symbolic things, but it's real that we are finding unity, real unity in the body of Christ. And some of the relationships are tight and we know one another and others are not, and yet we are opening our hearts. All of you have opened your hearts to say, okay, God, what's this going to be like? We're not sure. So it's a bit of a ride, but the ride, I want to, if our story can encourage you at all, the ride has been challenging, as Pastor Larry was saying. The ride here of journeying together has also been incredibly, incredibly refreshing. And so to think of, even as we've experienced this journey, don't get us wrong, there's a lot of sleepless nights in some ways where you're just tossing around saying, okay, well, we're working through a concept or an idea. And so you should know there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work happening where this isn't just skipping through this scenario saying it's all going to be wonderful and okay. This is hard work, and we're engaged in that. And Pastor Larry's really leading the way in just being gracious with new ideas, and we're learning what it means to work together and then to bring these ideas to you. So I'll keep it that short because we got some stuff to do. I have just a passage of scripture I want to read for you, and I shared this with the group of elders from each of the churches gathered the other evening, and it comes from Ecclesiastes 4, which many of you are familiar with. Ecclesiastes 4, you will be when I read the section. I love Ecclesiastes, one of the wisdom books, so that's what we expect to get out of this. In verse 9 of chapter 4, it says this: 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. So, you could say a lot about that passage, but what you see is almost a ramping up. 1 follower of God, 1 follower of Jesus, that's good. The Bible doesn't really talk about anything other than that person also having relationships with others, but one is important, necessary. 2 are good. 3, in other words, now before we land on saying, so are we talking about 3 locations and we'll only ever have 3 because that's some wonderful perfect number? No, the point is, as you increase the accountability, as you increase those who are in it together, you get stronger. And so we just have to, That doesn't mean we have to do anything when we walk out of this room and it has to look a certain way. What it means is that the principle is solid, it's there, it's clear, and that's what we're engaging right now, this biblical principle and how it applies to 21st century churches, and in this case, our 3 churches. So that just encourages me. I know it seems probably obvious. If you've followed Jesus for any length of time, you're like, thank you, Pastor Jim, got it. But we need those reminders because they just help to build a foundation. The document you have in front of you then becomes a tool for you, first of all, to read through. We're not going to read through this word for word just for the sake of time. But I want you to be able to have it and ask questions from it, even as we go into the question section. As you look through sections there, of course, it's better together envisioning one church with multiple gathering points. I ask what we're talking about. I give some detail there, why we should do it, a section, what it will look like, and then finally, when will it happen. Please read through that so that that can inform your questions. Just some highlights out of the what we're talking about section. I really want to focus on, in that section, the mission piece, and even what the video that you saw, that parable of those farmers, what it teaches us is that when we come together, there's a harvest. There's a harvest that we're in this for. Right? It's not just to get around that table for our own sake, but rather to be in a harvest and gather souls and people in to follow Jesus with us and to feast with them, both now and forever, right? That's the big vision that we have, and we're saying, okay, God, maybe you're leading us to do that vision this way. So about halfway through over to the right, it says that the church we're talking about as we come together will not be a church that exists only for itself, but rather a church that constantly pursues new relationships for the sake of multiplying disciples across the valley and beyond. It will be a church on mission that seeks the good of the community while declaring the gospel to the world. It will be a church that partners with other biblical churches and networks to continually send laborers into the great global harvest. So if we can take that and the pictures, maybe the images that you've seen already, and put that before us as what we're in this for, okay? That really gets to the heart of it. When you go to the why we should do it section, that's brief. We can talk about that as you have your questions. What it will look like, though, doubles over a little bit about what we're talking about section, but it bullet points some things. And so I would encourage you to look down through there, maybe to dash through it quickly, though. Maybe we'll just do the bullet points. That we're talking about being a church united by the gospel and submitted to biblical truth. That's where it all starts. Amen? A church led by elders from across the various gathering points, at this point, the separate churches. A church built on healthy relationships that are worked out through small groups. A church that provides ongoing care through small groups and local gatherings. A church where teaching is generally unified across all groups and gathering points. A church that shares ministries, such as the men's, the women's, the children's, the teens' ministries. Little story, met with our teen leaders this past week, and as they see their future as teen leaders and a youth group, they are seeing the working together as necessary for success, as part of the path forward because of where our church happens to be at, and there's a critical mass that has now grown, and we've got to say, okay, we got to do something with them, and this, what God has brought together, could be a big part of that. That's just one example of sharing ministries. Next, a church that frequently, like we did today, brings together all of its members for worship. A church that serves the communities wherever gathering points are located, such as the South Side, here in North Bethlehem, over in Allentown. A church that is financially unified, managed through a careful budgeting process, and a church joined to the Charis Fellowship and the Charis Alliance. So when will it happen? What we're talking about now is simply saying, okay, we are not going to force anything. That is not what we're in this for. We want time to process. We want time to work on it. What we want to assure you is that though these are decisions that all of our churches and in our leadership, we have always included, first of all, constitutionally we're congregational. However, we've always included the body in the discussion and the development of things. That being said, you don't want us to bring everything to you. I promise. All the elders would shake their heads like, no, you don't want to be in on every part of this conversation. But you have entrusted us with the journeying through this process. We take that very seriously. And so as we work on things, we want to bring as much as is a sure thing to you as possible and keep moving that process along. In order for us as pastors to serve the elders, we've had a boot camp experience where we went away for 4 days together and we hashed things out and we talked things through, and we're talking about philosophy. When you've done it this way and you've done it this way and you've done it this way, how do we bring that together? All of those kinds of things are happening. And so your pastors are, we are coming together, and in intense periods of time, we are trying to sort out through how we might do this, and then we carefully take that to the elders, and then we're able to bring things to you that we hope will bring you joy. So I just want to give that as a process, and with that as a process, we're going to continually measure where we're at and look into the fall here and say, okay, it seems that the next step might be something whereby we give enough of a picture of what we're doing and the big vision and some structure that you're able to see this is something that we can trust, this is something that we understand, this is something that we can commit to before every I is dotted and T is crossed. Because there's all kinds of legalities. One of our members is a lawyer in our church, and we just put this idea out there, and you could tell the wheels in his head just started going like this. And he literally then forwarded me a 3-page bullet point list of questions. So yeah, there's a lot to work through. So that is the process that we're in, and yet, in order for us to really get behind an idea that, okay, God is in this, he's moving forward, we don't have to touch every little thing, and we want to have a culture of trust, where you trust your elders and all of you are able to trust your pastors, and we work on this together. So that's a bit of the journey forward, and of course you can, again, read that section. When you go to the next page, you'll see the infographics here, and we just want to draw some attention to those because some of us think in pictures, and I get excited when I look at each of these, but when I look at this first one, I think it's just really cool to see this. If you think the triangle is strangely crooked, it's because it's an actual map of the Lehigh Valley. So when you are looking at that, let me see, up in the top left-hand corner, you'll see a shaded area, that's the airport, okay? And Route 22 is sort of the light yellow line going across the top there. So this is the Lehigh Valley, and this is where each of our current separate churches are located. I think it's been timed. It's 10 minutes from one to 13 minutes to another to 13 minutes to another. So we are triangulated within 15 minutes of one another. So as you look at that, even the visual gives you an idea that the way that it creates, yes, a solid triangle, it creates that shape and that presence, that footprint on the Lehigh Valley. What we've tried to do is acknowledge various aspects of what we envision the new church to look like. And that is, you see all around the triangle and even there inside the triangle, there are kind of two icons or two pictures. The one is a family with one child. It happens to work out that way, but that represents families. Families all across the valley, different family units that are part of, in this case, all of our current churches and in the future, the entire church. And then you see another icon, and if you can't make it out, I hope you can, you have the page in front of you, but it's a family around tables, or it's people around tables. And that represents something that we'll talk more about into the future. The elders have spent a good amount of time on it, and that is a small group network within the church. Where families, a handful of families, are coming together to hold one another accountable, to have time in the Word, gospel conversations, prayer time. And what we're envisioning is that would be sort of a constant in the life of the church. It's not something that comes on and off. It's something that stays. It's just part of our life together. And so as you see, those groups would then be spread across the valley. And then as it may work out, maybe if you live near one of the locations, that's fine. Whichever location you're probably already a part of is where you're going to gravitate toward. And so what we see there is that the church buildings, right, or the locations are where these groups and these families then are gathering, much like we do now. Let's not overthink it. So what is it then that we are looking to do so that we're not just three separate churches? And that's where you look into the center and you see that what we want to share are, well, pastoral leadership. We're going to share in the theology and the doctrine that we build our Christian life on, build on good hermeneutics or study of the Bible. Our identity would be shared. where there would be a sharing, changing, yes, of a situation where we all share the same name and we identify ourselves as we are one people in the Lehigh Valley. You also look at finances and say, yes, we want to unite them in a way that we commit to one another. Next is leadership, and that goes to the elders and other leaders who will serve within the ministry. The ministries, as I've already mentioned, the mission and the vision, which will be united. And what we want to do as a church is constantly keeping before you what it is that we're in this for. Why? Because as you're bringing different people from different paths and different past church experiences together, if we don't keep our vision in front of us, that we are here to go reach people for Jesus and to disciple them and bring them up in the faith, right, so that they can go out and do the same. If that's not constantly before us, then suddenly whether you have pews or chairs can be a really big deal. And we all know that that's just silly. So we don't want to go down that path. So we'll constantly keep that mission and vision in front of you. And then there are key structures, even as I mentioned, a small group culture and life together, and other structures that we'll all be doing the same things in many ways. Church services may look similar at each campus, although there will be variations, and yet we will have similar times and similar rhythms as a church coming together. So this gives you a bit of a sense of there'll be a lot going on, but what I might add to this graphic, if I could, in your mind, is that out from each one of those buildings, can you just imagine an arrow pointing away from it and out further and further out from it? And when you look at all those families, can you imagine arrows just pointing out? And when you imagine those groups, can you imagine arrows pointing out? The idea is that whether it's a small gathering within our church or a large gathering, we are on a mission. We are going to reach people for Jesus and love people with the kindness and goodness of Jesus so that we might tell them about his salvation. So this is what we're constantly doing, constantly thinking, how can we go and see more people come around our table? Very good. The next infographic here that I would give to you then would be this, and that is what I've called layers of impact and support. So what do I mean by that? Layers of impact and support. Well, please don't look at the graphic and say, there's a person in the center. I thought as Christians we don't see ourselves as the center of our universe, and I would agree with you. So please don't read the graphic that way. But when you look there, you see an individual. We all come to Jesus and build a relationship with God through Jesus as an individual. That's a choice that we make. And from there, though, you see that we want to have impact as a follower of Jesus on the very next sphere of our life, which is what? Our family. Whatever the family unit is, and that meets us all differently. But we invest in and follow Jesus in loving and impacting our family. What's next? How do we impact the next layer? Well, what we're suggesting is there would be a small group of people within your life that you're regularly meeting with, that you are learning from and you are investing in, that you are impacting that small group. Out from there would be you impact a local gathering, okay, one of the gatherings of our one church. Out from there would be the large church, whatever we name it when we get to that point. And then out from there, we have this, and of course, Lehigh Valley Grace, you already have the relationship with Charis Fellowship, and you've had a long history with them. That is new to me and Pastor Rick and to our churches, and so we're still learning and growing and understanding what that would mean for our church, but we understand enough to be able to say that it would be a healthy thing that we are part of Charis Fellowship. Now, that has different aspects. There's region, then there's national, and then there is global, okay? The global impact of Charis Fellowship. And not only Charis, because we've also talked about there's other missionaries who aren't Charis missionaries and so forth, but our goal is always to be able to have impact in another sphere. So some of us have global impact because we give faithfully to global missions. Others of us will have global impact because we are part of a church that is part of a network that makes available to us opportunities to go to Chad and to go to Central African Republic and to go to Haiti and other places. And suddenly, for Rick's church and our church, for us, it's like, you mean we're that connected that quickly to these kinds of opportunities? That's new for us and very exciting. So we can have impact if we go from the center of the circle out, but then we also get support, don't we? Who reminds us that God's work is global? Well, a lot of places and a lot of people. But as a church, we can be reminded regularly by the Charis Alliance, which is global, right? Charis Fellowship has 250 churches in the U.S. and 3,000 worldwide, right? We're in the minority. And so that's just a great thing to be, I think, as an American church. And so we have the Charis Alliance reminds us of God's global work. And then down from there, the nation is reminding us what God is doing in the national sphere. And it supports what we're doing by giving some vision as a group. And you can work your way all the way back to the center of the circle where, especially for our church, something like this, a gathering where we've come together today, gives us perspective, doesn't it? It tells us we are going to have an awesome time in heaven, right? And sometimes that's enough to give perspective, right? And so whether it's that or whether it's something very practical, by being one church united, that will give us support. And that will help us through our teaching and through our gatherings where we're all coming together. And then from there, we go to our local gathering, and that supports us maybe even more closely as elders are shepherding us through that campus or through that location. And then you come down to a small group, and our small group is constantly looking out for us and holding us accountable. Then you come down to our family, which is healthy because it's being supported by all these other layers. And now we're growing disciples that can impact the world while they're also receiving constant support. And so that's what we're envisioning, is building a church scenario where we're caring for people by having the big picture, constantly on mission, constantly supported and cared for. So, I don't know how long that took, but.
I have a handheld mic that we're recording this, so if somebody that's not here wants to get a part of it, they'll be able to catch things and won't have to re-ask the same question. So we're going to ask you to raise your hand if you have a question that we can use this for. In the meantime, if you've written a question, would you pass it to the center aisle? I'll collect them and bring them up so that they can be asked from up there.
Good. All right, should I tackle the first written one? I had to read it, sorry, process for a second. It's a couple sentences, so I don't know if I should thin it out. Either way, I think the heart of the question is essentially, what about the teens? And with that, it seems to be from here at Lehigh Valley Grace because they're particularly thankful for the castles. So that's my assumption. Yeah, isn't it? That's great. So with becoming 3-in-1, instead of Lehigh Valley Grace looking for someone to come alongside Pastor Larry, and as our youth group continues to grow, what is the vision for the youth group? So, good question. I did touch on that with ministries, and that being we don't have any promises as to what the structure would be, but as Graceway's youth leaders were saying is that our future going forward seems like we have a growing youth group that might do well to fairly regularly. I say that, and I'm only saying that cautiously, the words were a bit stronger, but fairly regularly seeing youth group life being done with all of the groups together. So what that does, and this can be this can be a case study for other types of ministries in a similar category, kids ministries and men's and women's ministry, is that if Lehigh Valley Grace has a youth team that do all of the challenges that are going to be shared and all of the planning that gets done, and Graceway has one of those right now, and you guys have a team, probably do things least frequently of all the groups on our, as far as a formal kind of gathering, but still, you guys are doing the work. And so what happens when, let's say it's just one couple at each church pouring into the teens? Well, now it's 6 people working together. And now, if you're going to prepare a challenge or an event for 10, you might as well plan it for 30, right? And so you can then share in the teaching, and you can share in all those things. So what it does is it immediately, even though it seems maybe overwhelming that you're combining 3 groups, actually pretty quickly it could be a matter of sharing the load 3 ways or 6 ways, or bring other people into that and get more team members into your youth group. So that's kind of the vision that we have, is how can we come together in ways that just make sense. Now, if one of the youth teams were to say, I think there's a real value in the kids that we've worked with for a while that come from a particular location, that they also have a time where they kind of work things out together. We're open to hear that. And really, I've even said our youth teams need to figure this out for the youth teams, which is going to be similar as well with children's teams and men's and women's ministry and all of that. So how might we add to that or nudge it around a bit?
And I think the aspect of it, how you approach the question, if you approach it of, hey, here's the structure of how we do things, what happens to that structure? At the end of the day, we're all going to say, who cares about the structure? How do we get these people between 13 and 19 years old presenting complete before God and pass on God's word to that next generation? So now, instead of having 2 people think it through, you're having 6 people think it through, whatever the number is, in addition to pastors and people, and you're saying, how can we get these 13 and 19-year-olds in this area presented complete before God, reach out to people? And especially if it's, like, we bring up the Castles, for instance, but for our church, we had a regular couple that ministered with their teens, met with them regularly. They moved out of the area. You know what happened to the teens getting together regularly? It ended. And they ended up getting back together sporadically because another couple got passionate about it. And this way, if you have more people thinking on that age group, how to present them complete, and thinking through how best to impact them in relationships, you're going to have more wisdom on the subject than you do less. And I was even curious about what that matters for. So I asked a few teens, and all the teens are probably more excited than anybody else in this room to have a group of like-minded kids that are in public schools together, that are going through life together, maybe finding a special someone in that group, because the pool before wasn't very big, as an example. But you don't know what God does through these things, and it's now more wisdom put on the subject because there's more people thinking about it.
A couple of combined things that are really amazing. Karis has this National Summer Teen Conference called Momentum. It's now been billed as the best week of summer, and any teen that has gone to it comes back from that experience. It's a connection that we have because of the Karis Fellowship. Younger age kids, we have camp in the summertime. That's another week of a different environment, but it's a spiritual thing that they can come together with other kids, and it's so awesome. And so there are some things that when we combine, we're going to benefit. Every teen is going to benefit from. But we aren't retiring the Castles either way. So.
Well, I think too, like you just said, even thinking of retirement, and yet this becomes energizing, right? There's, yes, new people that you're interacting with, but there's new partners in ministry. And so it enlivens us a bit to say, oh, this could be the same journey but different. And God uses that to keep us going. Is there any follow-up to either youth or expanding that to ministries, maybe from the floor?
What's the question?
I just want to make sure the Castles are good to keep going with the youth.
What do you think of this idea of working with other youth groups?
Well, it's already been a success as it is with our last youth group. We had, I think it was 6 kids from ABC come over, and yeah, the playtime, game time was great, and everybody loved it. But even from the spiritual standpoint, Michelle and I just did a follow-up from Momentum on different speakers, and a lot of the kids loved what we were just discussing concerning that. So moving forward, we'll definitely be stronger together from a youth standpoint.
Okay.
We've seen you guys, especially at Lehigh Valley Grace, open your doors to a lot of our kids in a lot of the needy areas that we, as churches with a lot of younger families, have. And we've we've really appreciated that. But have you guys thought through opportunities that we could give back to this church area to help the elderly, to help those that maybe need some help around the house? And so it's not just one-sided in its focus, but that we can in turn give back and help to the older generation who's done such a good job equipping and wants to be an equipper in the lives of these young churches.
Well, I guess that's for me. We old people, I don't want to paint our church that way just because I am. We got a lot of young people in our church, but thank you, Mom. I love you. We have this God-blessed facility and land here that from time to time we have to spend energy and time cutting down weeds and trimming things up and getting it together. And we would enjoy coordinating. We look forward to coordinating some times where you all could come and help us in that, because this is going to be our facility, not just our facility, if we're moving forward in this way. And that would be one great way. And yes, we have a number of retired folks that, whether it's cleaning up their garden or raking their leaves in the fall or different things like that, that our teens try to do sometime, that would be another thing that a larger group would enhance. And yeah, so that's just real quick things, and I'm sure there'll be more that we can come up with, but absolutely, we'd welcome that give and take in that way.
Good. Anything further on those types of ministries? Okay. Another one here. How do we get involved in these small groups? That's good. So I know that these guys are so gracious. If they hear the word small togetherness again, they're probably going to slap me. But the only reason is Graceway had gone through a period of time where we had a small group culture, and then we stepped away from it for a while, and then we had to reevaluate. And so we came back to, we really did believe that God was leading us into these kinds of small groups where you do life together, but there's gospel conversations, and yet they're not Bible studies, and yet there's hospitality, and there's prayer, and there's spiritual guidance and care for one another, which is really, really important. And so we just journeyed along a path of seeing that was really healthy for us. And as pastors, were talking with some of the elders as well, and then came back to the elders being able to say, there's really merit, even biblically, when you look at all the one another's in the Bible. It's not a Graceway idea, right? This is the one another's in the Bible. There's intentionality about being with other Christians and getting close enough that Ephesians has to tell you to tolerate one another with love. So that tells you the nature of how these relationships might work. And so what we do is we do create we've created some structure for it, in that we have what we call our pillars, and they're just expectations that when the small group leaders come together, that we can have discussions about, well, is your group touching on the Word of God, praying together? Is your group doing these basic things that are just Christian discipleship things? And so that's what it is. Even as you look at the image on the board, it's just a way of holding one another accountable and living out what it means to be Christian, but with real people. And yes, it structures that a little bit, but in a way that builds up the whole church, because all of the groups will be sort of journeying in a similar way at the same time, even though each group will be different. With that said, the work we will be doing is saying, okay, when do we officially, as we move along, say, okay, let's talk about how best to structure these groups from here. We have ideas. Many of you already gather with people on a fairly regular basis because you're encouraged by one another. So why wouldn't we want to acknowledge some of that and say, hey, keep doing what you're doing. Are you willing to maybe see another family come join you? Maybe that family is from what's now Graceway, and another family is from what's now Allentown Bible. And so you come together and hey, sometimes it's weird, it's awkward, you don't know each other, and you got to work things out for 3-4 months before it's like you even know what the rhythm can be with your group. And so it's just a matter of saying, okay, we want to help people get into these groups, and we'll have someone working with that and coordinating. And then once it's all set, as the churches are actually coming together to become one, in the future there'll be a very clear pathway that, oh, you visited us on a Sunday, great. And you're interested in staying with us, great. This is who we are, this is what we do. We want to help get you to a small group, and there'll be a very clear process for them. Maybe even handouts and things like that help say, this is kind of how we do this.
Say that again, please.
Are we going to be assigned a small group, or are we going to be able to choose a small group?
Yeah. So I know I'm doing a lot of speaking here, so I'm not speaking authoritatively because that's what we're developing right now. There's a lot of things that's like, yes, we're committed to do that, but exactly what it'll look like. When we went through this at Graceway, it was, well, some people might not naturally connect with others, so they need the help in getting the groups together. And then if they need that help, we can think about what are the dynamics if that family's coming with that family. So we can think through that, but then we have just one-on-one conversations versus, the rosters for things in high school or in elementary school, and you're like, where am I at? There I'm at. Oh, I'm with them. Oh my good. Hopefully we don't feel that way, but it's like, well, how's that going to work? Like, how's that relationship? That's not really a healthy relationship. So what we're going to do as pastors and even the elders are going to bring insight into what could these groups look like in a way that serves you. We're here to serve you and equip you to be good disciples. And so that'll be the heart behind that.
And some small groups may be identified with the particular gathering, the north side, the south side, or Allentown east side. But then there'll also be some groups that will probably have a mix of which campus, which gathering you do on Sunday, but you'll be meeting. And so it'll get worked out, but nobody's going to be pressed in, do it this way or you're out kind of attitude.
I mean, we have, go ahead.
Are the small groups on different days, or are they on the same day?
It's what works for the group. So it is the kind of thing that there's trust given to that small group leader who coordinates with a person who's overseeing them. And so if you want to meet Thursdays and that works for everybody, then that's what you do. And if another group meets Wednesday, perfectly fine. Yeah. That's right. So when we talk about these things, especially if it's new to you, sometimes it can feel like, wow, that's a lot of structure. Does it have to be that complex? But the structure is really there to serve people. That's how I see it should be, right? That the structure serves the people. And so it's here to create, actually the structure in this case will create a lot of space for you to do things the way that your group needs to do them to grow as disciples of Jesus.
And I think, Pastor Jim, Krista gave me the book that you did.
Yep. We're just trying to record it, so if we throw you a microphone.
Krista gave me the book that I think it was Graceway that did, and I haven't finished it, but my initial thought with the small group was, I thought it's not ladies coming together to read, it's literally families. And it doesn't have to be with children, but it's, you are taking this nucleus and adding others to it and actually bonding together as a larger family unit, is my understanding.
Yes.
So it would be, from what I'm reading so far, it can happen on different days. Maybe we're going to be joining her for her small group next Sunday. So you will, because I'm excited ever since you talked the first time here about the small group, because that's right up my alley. I'm gathering that once you get together as pastors, you're going to kind of guide who would be the leader of a small group versus me deciding, you know what, honey, I'm going to invite these people over, which was what I initially was going to do. So this is something that we're going to wait for your guidance to actually start the small groups?
Yeah, but if you have interest and thoughts, come to us, and we will help plug you in where it's going to be most effective.
So we can do it sooner rather than later, is what it would if we were
Right.
to start. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, gathering as the people of God in small units where you're encouraging one another in the faith, you don't need any permission to do that. We're just, but what, no, I know what you mean though, yeah, as like the church official thing, and you know, I'm also being very careful because though we've had done a lot of work with small groups, I am not speaking authoritatively in this moment as to what this new church will do, because this is something that we decide and work on together. I'm just able to speak to what we've done at Graceway. And maybe some of that carries over, maybe some of the terminology changes, maybe some of the structures nudge and move a little bit, but the heart of the matter is that the church is gathering in groups like this to really have rubber meets the road conversations. And so if you say, I really grow when I'm with these people over here, and we're not in groups, them or us, yes, come in to us and say, we'd like to be the nucleus of a new group kind of thing. It could definitely unfold that way.
As far as the composition too, like I like the whole, we're thinking through the structures pointing out as well. So if I give you I would say probably, we call them community groups, just a name, but I'd say they've probably been the most effective ways to reach out to the community out of any other method we've used. So if I talk through the composition of what our group's been over the years, we have a teen girl that's coming that her mom has stepped foot once in the doors of our church. We had two young kids coming that's how we started getting really connected to their family. And then their mom and her boyfriend got married, came together as a family, got saved, got baptized. It's like God can do cool stuff through this. We have one family that's intact. We have another one that's a single mom. Another one's a single lady. I'm not going to say her name because she's here and I don't want to get it wrong. But I mean, it's this blended composition. So I think that's what even gives it the most effectiveness. People coming from different stages of life.
And even though I'm not the visionary, let me just speak in a visionary sense about this, that geographically meeting at different places. One of the goals of the small group is that the small group grows to where it's too big to be a small group and it divides into two small groups. And if geographically we're moving outward from that picture Pastor Jim talked about earlier through parts of the Lehigh Valley, and we find a conglomerate of groups up Northampton somewhere, who knows that these 3 Sunday gatherings might not turn into 4 Sunday gatherings at some point. Just thinking, and I see these small groups both as accountable, as Bible study teaching, but also potentially evangelistic and reaching out on mission.
That's really good. I see a hand in the back. While you're on your way, when we were doing our work on really considering what worked for Graceway with small groups, we designated what we called 2 milestones. We could probably find a better mental picture, but the 2 milestones are the 2 things that tell us we're going the right direction with our groups, and that means they're healthy and they're focused and thinking about the right kinds of things, and they're not just like, let's be comfortable together. But even having Bible lessons, we can tend to be comfortable together, but rather stirring things up so that what shows that you are really growing as a small group is that in time, and there's no magical amount of time, but in time, your group, as Pastor Larry just said, would be multiplying because you're bringing people in. The next question on here was, can we bring unbelievers to the small groups? And part of what we do with training our leaders has been make space for that. You know, and so we've had even that happen within our church where people start coming to small groups and now they're just listening really closely because they're being loved really well in that group. And now they're hearing the gospel differently than they've ever heard it before, in case maybe they never heard it before, but they're hearing it. And they're hearing it from people who really love them, and they see that in this room and in this space. And so what we expect is that over time, now one group might grow like really fast and the next group grows, well, slow, but there's people that they're bringing into the circle of discipleship, right? Because that's what we should always be concerned about, that people are coming to encounter Jesus through our influence and our family's influence and our group's influence. And then multiplication and mission, that we don't just sit in our houses, but we encourage one another to reach our neighbors when we go back to our other homes, but then also maybe there's some projects we can do together. And Lehigh Valley Grace has been, as I hear your testimony, like great at teaming up with others and go, and then we support you and we pray for you. And that's the kind of culture we want for all those groups.
Okay, can you explain how the Sunday morning worship
It's a really great question. Do either of you feel passionate to answer? I can certainly jump in.
You got this one, Larry?
I loved one of our elders, I won't name Craig's name, but, he actually, and it wasn't about this particular thing, but he said, you know, I'm thinking about this merger concept as like one church with 3 worship services. If you've ever been in a larger church that has more than one worship, you know they're at different times and they are a little bit different maybe in flavor and whatever else. And in essence, that's kind of, in a way, what we are. We're going to be at 3 locations. The time might be the same, the time might be somewhat different. We're talking about, as pastors, maybe working together on the message, themes, and topics, although I'm not sure you're going to get the same outline if you're at Bridle Path on Sunday morning as you're going to get on South Side or East Side, Allentown. So there will be some things that are similar, some things that are unique to each location, because one of the things that we're wanting to do is preserve the fact that the South Side is reaching that community, and there are some unique things that they can identify with, and East Allentown is reaching their community, and we're reaching ours, and so our services will reflect that individuality, but we're looking to work together, so I don't want to say it the wrong way. It's not that it's going to be easier and we aren't going to have to study as hard to preach our messages. That's not the idea. But my son-in-law sits down with a couple other pastors from a couple other churches, and they preach the same ideas, and they get to share ideas, and it's so much better together in that regard. So that's part of it, but there are other things.
And what we did today, we envision doing this on some frequency, a fairly regular frequency, not every week, not every other week probably, probably not every 3 weeks. I could go on. Monthly to every other month. There's some kind of rhythm that we will have to being together. Lord's Suppers. We could have a local gathering, Lord's Supper, 2 times a year, and 2 times a year we could have the whole church together. We can talk about that. That hasn't been nailed down. These aren't promises, right? But what we want to do, which is really interesting as we've heard other multi-site models, we, only until last week or the week before, you hadn't heard of any multi-site model that they actually worship together, all the sites coming to one place. So they have same structures. They might see some same faces. They call the same name. They do things the same way. You know, the signs look the same at all the places, but they never get to worship together. And so in this facility, we all fit in, at least for now. Over where we're at Dunnigan, we could go up to 500 people. We got a wall. All we got to do is turn the motor on and close it. And even where Rick's been at the bingo hall.
We can raise funds.
Holds, I think, we could do 300 or something like that. Anyway, point being, we have that kind of flexibility. We can do it. And because we're going to be one family, why wouldn't we? Come together like this today. I mean, we love worship at Graceway. This was awesome, and so we're looking forward to the time together. One thing that we want to do is not only have an identity on paper, right, or on the website. Like, we're all the same church. Go to the website, but then you got different locations and we never see one another. We want it to be real. Like, we want it to be tangible. Even as you look at that circle up on the screen, you can actually touch all those layers, right? You could, if you pursue it. And in a similar way, we want you to be able to know the other people in the whole church, as long as we can, right? Who knows what God's plans are with who He brings us and how many and all of that. So that kind of touches on Sundays as well.
I was just curious about baptisms.
We will continue to baptize.
Baptisms.
Is there an aspect of the baptism question?
I mean, like, because we don't have a pool or...
Is this location set up for?
Behind that blue curtain is a baptistry that's ready to go.
Well, isn't that a joy? We've got to do baptisms once a year in somebody's pool.
We've gone down to the river to do it. Some people like the living water, moving water, and we've done it at the river. But yes, we do have it here. In the wintertime, we usually do it here.
Well, let's jump on the facility conversation because, of course, God has blessed you with this facility. You've used it for many, many years. Our 2 locations don't have permanent facilities, but strategically we feel that we should be there. And yet, already your church, you might not know this, but your church here at Lehigh Valley Grace has afforded Pastor Rick and I space to use an office. We occasionally use it now, but in the future, if we come together, now all the pastors at the church have an office. And we have a space to meet and to counsel if we need that space. Now, with that said, having a small togetherness, or small group culture rather, having a small group culture, we also want to do as much in homes and in people's space as possible because there's something that God can do in those spaces as well. So we're not chomping at the bit to bring everything to a location, and if you're at, the south side or over in Allentown. But this is a rich blessing that you've appreciated and enjoyed and are already extending it to us, and it's been
Yeah, I see it kind of as a best of both worlds kind of thing. We have the facility when we need the facility, but we don't want the facility, we don't want to serve the facility. The facility here is here to serve us, and our mission is what we're going to serve.
Good. Any follow-up questions from the floor? Any other written questions we want to turn in? This is when you quick hand it to the person next to you and have them wave it, yeah. So it doesn't look like your question. Let me finish out this one card. Is there greater financial strength or financial, is it weakness? With combining? The one I just received was, how would the finances work for the 3-in-1 church? I don't know who that came from, but. So, we have talked about this. Don't take that silence as we haven't talked. So what we've discerned in, and it took some time to really think on this because these aren't easy things. And if you're in the financial world and you think in numbers all the time, you're going like, yeah, this could get, this could get interesting. What we really came to is the place of, if we're going to be one, we need to be one financially. And so, there will be strength in what we do as far as what we plan for, in that we all know from year to year through good budgeting that gets approved by the whole church and developed by the elders in relation to people who are doing ministry, right? That we can draw together a budget that says, let's say an operations budget at Southside, right? This will take this to run ministry at that location. It'll take this to run ministry at the other location, and it'll take this to run ministry at this location, which by that point is a lot of just Sunday to Sunday kind of stuff. There will be maybe some other uniquenesses. So what we want to do is you want to say, what does it take to do ministry? And then that becomes a section of the same budget that we share. And it gets, by the elders who are shared across those other locations, we would imagine that they're coming from the various locations, that elder team is discerning those budgets to say, so for instance, you can hear about these kinds of things, and there's horror stories about how they tried a multi-site thing, but the way they structured the finances allowed one person to renovate a building, one campus to renovate their building, and the other campus can barely pay the salary for that pastor or something like that. And so you get these discrepancies. What we would do is create a financial plan that is worked up by elders who are caring for and overseeing all of the campuses, and then it comes to the people to be talked about and approved eventually. So there is a process there, and I think there's more we could go in with finances.
Just real quick, though, the part that won't seem hardly different at all is we all 3 locations, develop our finances around a budget that is based on ministry. We have 5, 6 ministry teams, and in the fall we say to the ministry teams, what do you need to make your ministry run next year? And if facilities, we need this brand new shed, that is about falling apart. So we put that kind of thing in the budget. And so each church is operating the same way right now, and each church track record in the last number of years is operating, meeting their budget each year. So what you're doing right now is based on, the budgets serve what you're doing right now. That's not going to change. So in that regard, it's sort of not going to feel like a change. One of the positive sides on the finances is that the combined resourcing is we don't have to pay for 3 websites, we don't have to pay for 3 offices, 3 copy machines, 3, yada yada, things that could be repetitive that we can combine in the resourcing, and not that that's going to probably all of a sudden save us thousands of dollars, but we see that as a benefit. On the other side, yeah, there are things that change, like people that are used to going here. If we move forward in this direction, this will no longer be North Campus facility. This will be our facility, okay? And so there will be some change in thinking of some of that type of thing.
Then according to the illustration, we buy a tractor. We've never had a tractor before. I mean, finances are resource, people are resources. You use finances to free up people's time, or you find a way to do it without the finances, right? Did anybody else follow me? I mean, I work in the nonprofit world, and I do the business development and finances for the Valley Against Sex Trafficking. So as we think through it, we hired a full-time executive director this year. Do we have the funds for it? Well, it depends how you look at it. No, but we have funds for the growth she's going to bring and it's going to come in the future. And already, since we have somebody freed up to think about our mission has expanded and exploded, and we've had more influence in 3 months that she's been full-time than before we brought her on. And I was on it January through March on my own, part-time, about ready to rip my head off and getting nowhere, just keeping balls in the air, as many as I could. So when we're looking at finances, we're looking up ways to advance mission and ministry to free up people with different focus on that. I mean, that's what money is at the end of the day, right? And the one thing that we dealt with in it was, okay, so we have 3 different places we're gathering. Do we then do an offering at each location for all 3 locations? Because maybe you guys didn't want to drive as far on a Sunday morning. You thought, hey, like 2 blocks away, outside Bethlehem. How does this impact Allentown? And collectively realize we're trying to reach all places, so how do we do that shrewdly and with wisdom, with finances? So I think this whole thing is going to both free up finances in the way he said and cost more. It's going to be both, right? But hopefully it's to the point where we can advance more of the mission in the future.
Follow-up questions?
I have no more written ones, so.
My wife asked me to formulate a question on how membership would work. And I think I'm just going to speak extemporaneously real quick. So how do we become members of this greater church? Do we just put all the members in together? But I think more importantly, because I think that's just a transition method, how do we keep people accountable within membership? Because membership is important, because when someone drops off, it's that sheep that's lost, and we need to go out and find them and help bring them back and restore them to fellowship in worst case situations. We need to show love for that person. But in a 3-campus model, what's to prevent someone from drifting around to avoid conflict and getting lost in the mix and trying to hide? And we've all seen churches where you can go and hide. It's not the way any of us are. But someone might be able to hide by church hopping. How do we help that and create an environment that will help people grow and that we can bring them back into fellowship with their Savior?
Yeah, I think we've all found in our meetings together that we all greatly value membership and belonging. Is it the pragmatic American way to identify who's part of the church? Yes. But I think the concentric circles that are still up kind of answers that question. If you were, and we all know the area churches that have thousands upon thousands of people and you have no clue, the leadership has no clue who was there and who wasn't there, who's missing, who's been gone for 5 weeks or a month, or who's gone. But if you're pushing membership of the whole body, then you have the concentric circles that deal with that. So your small group leader should know if you're involved in the life of the church. In the local gathering, you have the elders that are checking in with those small group leaders to know who's missing or who's gone. You have pastors that are freed up to think about people and pray for them, and that are trying to identify where they are and how they're involved. So it's the constant reporting up, I guess, of what's going on and who's missing. I imagine now, in the context of our 3 spaces, nobody can miss and it isn't known that they're missing. I've been texting people all morning, hey, where are you? Are you okay? Is everything all right? Because you know that's because I have a relationship with them, and you all have that. But I would say the members, too, should be doing that for each other, right? So, I mean, it's the church togetherness that's supposed to care about the others that are there. So it's an authority thing, people that are over, but it's also the body working together.
I think it's another one of those examples, too, how structure can be meaningless. Structure can also serve people. And so by having an expectation that you're part of a small group, right, that's a structure, but it's a structure that's meant to make relationships come alive. So if that structure is working well and the people in it are loving people, according to and along with that structure, I think it becomes the net to catch people. And what had happened at Graceway, and the reason why we did the writing and the reason why we did some of that, is because in a 3-year step away from a small group model, we probably had, for our numbers, right, 3 families slip through the proverbial cracks, which then breaks my heart on the other side of that whole ordeal. And I go, what was missing? And I was kind of at a time of woundedness, and so I saw it, but I was still going through some hurt, and so I saw only clearly enough to put one of our elders, Nate Agentis, on that to say, we need to get back to a small group model. Can you go think on this, pray on this, and develop this? And that's how we even got back to that, because the net wasn't there, people slipped through the cracks, and as a pastor, I had to say, did I neglect my people because I didn't create a good structure for that? Now, each one of those families had their own reasons and so forth, and that was discipleship stuff that we could have leaned into. But nevertheless, we're responsible as pastors to create enough structure to be able to have the accountability that we need.
My answer is ornery pastors. I know these two, and they care about people as much as I do, and will create structures that need to happen beyond the small togetherness groups. But yeah, none of us have a come and hide in our church sense, and until we grow to 300 or more each, I don't think that's something we're going to have to worry about. And if the Lord grants one of us or more to grow that way, then we will develop systems that will help.
I imagine, unless there's another question, some of you might like to get home for an afternoon nap or whatever you do. So this is...
But if you have a question,
yes,
don't let that everybody else leaving. If you want to ask it now, and I do think the 3 of us are available to stay if you wanted to ask it more personal, but any other big group questions?
How do we bring on missionaries? Do they have to go to each campus, or are all the missionaries adopted into the one church?
Yeah, I am sure that we are going to adopt what each church has as our missionaries, and financially, whoever has been committed to that particular missionary is going to continue doing that, and we'll just see how that expands together, and new ones we'll take a look at together.
I would say on missionaries, I find myself incredibly encouraged by Lehigh Valley Grace, and I know you're a more established church and you've had time to work this out, but even the portion of your budget that goes toward missions is incredibly encouraging. And one of those dreams that you start a church and you're like, we might be able to support missions that way one day, and then planning a church happens, and so it takes a while to get to that point. So the fact that you have so much connection to missions and what God's doing in the world is a rich benefit to us coming together with you. And we all bring, by the way, mutual benefit. One group can teach a lesson, another group has a great example and a pattern they've been living, and so we could talk a long time about those things, but that's the kind of beauty that you come out of this unity, that you get out of this unity.
I want to praise and thank God for giving us Pastor Larry and you two pastors to lead us, and our elders, to lead us way He wants us. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And please keep praying hard, hard. I saw another hand somewhere, I think. Or somebody was just rubbing their eye, trying to stay awake. Going once. Going twice.
Now nobody wants to ask a question.
All right, let's finish up our time together with a word of prayer. Pastor Rick, I'm going to pass to you here in the prayer. Pray over this time. Thanks.
Just a word, or can it be more than a word?
It can be
Okay.
whatever the Spirit leads.
Let's pray, guys. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for these believers who stayed for late afternoon. However enjoyable it was, it's tiring. But I thank you that they're committed to your work to be done in your way with wisdom. God, this is your wisdom that we're looking for at the end of the day. We don't want to be closed off to your work, but we also don't want to be closed-minded and forget things. I pray that you'd give everybody involved wisdom. I pray that prayer would go forth from this room, prayer and excitement about what you can do when believers come together over your work, however that looks like in the future. God, you are the God who uses your word in this world to bring about your glory. I pray that you would do that through this. I thank you that we have, even in these months, found brothers and sisters in Christ that are in our area that encourage our hearts, knowing that we aren't alone at this work and that we've been able to bump into as we go about our daily lives. I pray that you'd help us to find intersections of relationships that we work together in reaching those people for you, and that we'd see your word go forth with more power and more results. God, you are the one that is doing the increase in this. I pray that we'd be faithful in the planting and the watering. I pray you'd bring us back to our homes with safety, that we would leave refreshed by what you did here today. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay. All right, please pay attention to this. We would like for you to hang out as long as you want. We'd like for you to swing by the kitchen, but can I ask you to swing by, go to the end and through the first double doors and go in the kitchen that way, because the Egyptian congregation is back in the middle of the fellowship hall doing worship right now, and we want to give them the privilege. This facility that we, people like me, complain about all the time, God is using in incredible ways. By the time we're cleaned up and gone, a Filipino church is going to come in here and worship later this afternoon. So you are part of what makes all of this happen for His glory. So,
Some children are in the nursery, which is at that end.
oh yeah.
Some are in the youth room, which is the hall next to the office, and some are in the library, and then the rest are out playing with the rabbit outside.
Let's especially get the kids over here so that the Egyptian church can have. The teens are all up in the tree line. And Fox up there. Thank you, Ron. Thank you. All right, we can turn that off, put it back.
I'm easily distracted. Somebody came to me, I can't find so-and-so, so I started going looking for so-and-so, and then I walked up, I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing something, and I reminded them,
Yep. I think they're going to come back. Yeah. funny, I have connections with them. The girl that they know from York, Tammy Durst, was my wife's cousin, is my wife's cousin. The church they went to when they lived in York, my Uncle Dick was a leader in that church for many years. They knew, of course they knew Tammy and they know Dick. So there were some neat connections that we made today. And the wife, April, she went to my high school. She didn't graduate from Spring Grove, but she went to Spring Grove. So, yeah, we kind of have this kind of combination.
He's been listening to your dissertation messages, and I happen to be the one the day that he came.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, great. Sorry for the bad impression. But he came back, so
Yes, yes, that's cool.
it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's good. He was real